I'm so excited to share with you one of my favorite tools in quilt making, which is half square triangle papers or special paper templates that you can use to make perfect half square triangles. My half square triangle template makes 8 half square triangles that are exactly the same. They are 2-inch finished half square triangle units. So let's go ahead with the little video course. I will start with showing you how to use the paper template to make your half square triangles. Happy quilt making! And here is the half square triangle template that I have designed for us to use. It will help you make 8 perfectly sized half square triangle units that will finish at 2 inches. This means that once we finish sewing each unit, they will be 2.5 inches square. And once they're sewn into our quilt blocks, they will be 2 inches square finished. Now, as you see here, I have printed these templates on regular copy paper, and that is just fine. Regular copy paper is a little bit more difficult to remove from the blocks after we've sewn them. You'll just have to fold and crease the paper along the stitch line several times before you remove it to prevent pulling out stitches at the same time. But I have used regular copy paper many times and I have not had a problem with it. There are also other papers on the market. They are made for paper piecing and they will go through your printer. Just buy the right size to go through your printer, and they work very well for this purpose also. Now here's a little trick that I've also learned and I really like it. At the dollar store, I found this doodle paper pad that has 60 pages, and this is pretty much the same consistency as those commercially sold paper piecing papers. It is about the same weight as coloring book paper. And the only problem with this is that it is 9 by 12 instead of 8.5 by 11, which goes through most American printers. The way that I solve that problem is I just take my quilting ruler and I line it up at 8.5 by 11. And I will just use my rotary cutter here to slice off the edges. And then I have 2 perfectly sized 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper that will work great for this half square triangle template. Here I have the template already printed up on my doodle paper from the dollar store, and it's going to work great for the half square triangles. The next step is to cut out your template along the solid gray line that is 1/8 of an inch away from the solid black lines, which will be your final cutting lines for this project. Now, you don't have to be super accurate when cutting out this line. It is really just a little safety zone for you here in case your 6-inch squares of fabric don't line up perfectly or they shift while you're pinning. This little 1/8 of an inch here is just a little safety zone for you. So I'm just going to eyeball it with my rotary cutter. Like I said, you can be a lot more accurate with this if you want to be. This is also just fine if you cut this out using paper scissors. But I'm just going to cut it out here using my rotary cutter. And as you can see, I was not perfectly accurate in cutting that out, and I'm not too worried about it. To use your half square triangle template, you'll take your 2 6-inch squares of fabric, place them right sides together. Mine are solids, so it doesn't really matter. And then place your half square triangle template right on top. I like to use just a few pins to hold my paper in place. Now, since I will be stitching along the dashed lines on the paper, I'm going to place my pins over here in these areas so that they don't get in the way of my stitching. Now, my fabrics were pressed and I also stabilized them with Best Press before I got started. So that's just a tip that might help you to make sure that your half square triangles turn out just nice and crisp and perfect. Now I'm going to sew along all of the dashed lines. There are 4 lines here. I will start sewing on the paper over here, which is just a little bit past my black cutting line, just to make sure that if there are any bird's nests on the bottom or if my stitches don't catch immediately, I've taken a couple stitches before I reach the actual half square triangle. One more tip is that you will want to set the stitch length on your sewing machine to something like 1.5. Some nice short stitches, because when we cut our half square triangles apart on the solid black lines, we don't want the stitches to be so big that they start to come apart too. Now let's go ahead and cut apart our half square triangle units. You can see here on the back of my piece that my fabric did slip a little bit away from the template on one edge, but that's going to be just fine because I left myself a little 1/8 of an inch safety area right here. So I'm going to check that first. I'm just going to lay my ruler along that solid black line here, and I will just trim away the paper and the fabric along that edge. And a little bit of fabric did come away, so it looks like I am safe. My fabric and paper are cut perfectly. So now I'm just going to make my way around the block, and I will just trim away the fabric and the paper. So now that I have trimmed away the outside edges along the solid black lines, I'm just going to start cutting the other lines. There we go. Now we will very carefully remove the papers from our half square triangle units. You've worked so hard on these little units, you don't want to remove the stitching when you remove the papers. But using a coloring book weight paper like that paper that I found at the dollar store, or using commercially sold paper piecing papers helps. But as I mentioned before, if all you have is regular copy paper, you can use that too. So you see here, I just fold back the paper to crease it, and also because I used short stitches on my sewing machine, that also helps perforate the paper a lot, and it helps it to tear away easily. And now I'm off to the ironing board to press all of these with the seams toward the darker side. The last thing I like to do with my half square triangle units is to just trim away these little dog ears. You can do this with scissors or with the rotary cutter. And trimming these little corners away, it just helps the back of your quilt block be neater and helps you see where you're sewing better if you don't have these extra little dog ears. And there we go.